Rob. Some of you just know me as Rob because you've met me before I took that moniker when I started doing tarot readings professionally. I was sort of challenged to make this video in a sense. Anytime you deal with one of Stevie Boy's disciples or initiates or whatever you want to call them, it's interesting because you can't have a normal conversation with these people. If you just say, well, I think he's wrong about that, you automatically fall into a high school level debate. And if you can't have a conversation about this guy with most of his followers, and I think it's because a lot of them haven't matured enough to know how to have an intelligent conversation without, having things fall into this sort of debate argument format. And so I'm just going to try and have a discussion. And this guy, one guy, and if any one of you who I've had a conversation with thinks that everything is directed at you, this is based on a lot of things, a lot of conversations I've had. And so, like I say, I did a little research and I wanted to come up with some points. Points to make. But this isn't directed at any one of the people that I've had conversations with. It's more directed at anyone and everybody who cares to listen. I want to respond specifically to... oh, and by the way, one guy even wanted me to debate this guy. And I don't think so. At any rate, there was a video here. Let me see if I want to make sure I get the right title of it. It was like 101, Freedom 101, or something like that. And crap, I just lost the link. But most people are familiar with his ideas and what he says. Okay, here's Liberty 101, an introduction to freedom.
And the initiation.
Okay, and I wanted to point out some of the things that were said because, I could just generally talk about what I know about him, but if I don't initiate specifics, his ilk will, his followers will cry. So here we are. First is he says he has these universal principles that his style of anarchism is based on. Well, I'm not sure he understands what a universal principle is. A universal principle pretty much means it's universal. It's true everywhere. At least that's my understanding of the word universal. And in principle, I don't think we have to define every word, but I think we think that if it's a moral principle or a moral idea and he's saying it's universal, that would mean we all agree on it. You might say gravity is universal because, or at least it's earth, anywhere in this earth it's universal. Is it universal across the universe? Probably, except maybe in a singularity, and that's why they call them singularities. But I digress. A universal principle means this is true everywhere. Okay? So his first explanation for his belief system, and it is just that, it's a fiction, it's a belief system, it's not universal, and I'll explain that, is non-aggression. Excuse me? Do you live on planet Earth? I mean, there's aggression everywhere, so apparently not everybody believes this. It's apparently not, and they say, well, is it a moral thing? And then you say, well, maybe he just means it's morally apprehensive to initiate aggression. Therefore, it's a universal moral. Well, I don't think that's true either. Well, first of all, let's look at this logically. John Nash, Nobel Prize winner for a lot of his games theory, had this idea of what's called the F You Buddy system. F you, well, a different word is used than F, but it's F you Buddy. The idea that if two people are on an island and there's a gun available, one guy might think to kill the other, and that would be aggression, right? But then again you say, well, maybe, he's going to trust the other guy. And so maybe think, you don't want to kill the other guy, you don't want to act aggressively, but then you think, but I don't know how the other guy's thinking. He might want to attack me. But then you think, you know what, I am going to take my chances that the other guy might be as altruistic as I am. But then you think, but wait a minute. Maybe he is, but he doesn't know that I might not get the gun and kill him. So he may be altruistic, but he might think that I think that he could do it to me. So therefore, and it gets into a very convoluted system of logic, but in the end, you accept the fact that the other guy might kill you because he thinks you might kill him. So, given the fact that you have no clue what the other guy is going to do, you initiate force as a defensive mechanism. And you can say, well, that's just a thought experiment. Well, our country used this as a reason to build up an incredible number of nuclear weapons. It's what the arms race is literally based on. So this idea of initiation of force, logically speaking, is a very real thing. And fortunately, it didn't happen that way, but we sure as hell built a lot of nuclear weapons thinking the other guy might not be thinking the way we're thinking. And like I say, that's a convoluted logical scheme. You can look it up. It's John Nash, F You Buddy. It'll explain in better method than I can. But now, that's sort of a logical reason you might want to initiate force or aggression. And you know, whether you call that self-defense or not. But is it moral to kill? Well, there's lots of people killing in the name of morality, and they have been for thousands of years. You know, kill the infidels. We can't have these infidels around, or you know, stone the sinner. It could be perceived within a culture that you're immoral if you don't stone the sinner. So what I don't know how this guy defines morality. Morality is pretty much an adherent to a system that you believe in, and ethics is the study of morality. Now, some people think these terms are interchangeable and use them, and maybe in colloquial English, you know, but when you want to speak about these things in a more specific manner, you understand that morality and ethics are not the same thing. The way I look at it is, all right, is it moral to kill your child if they're a female and not a male? Well, this is what certain Eskimo tribes have done. If the firstborn is a female, they put it on the ice. They don't, you know, is that acting aggression? Well, we'll say, you know, they're not literally killing it, but by the act of putting it on the ice and shoving it off into the ocean, or just leaving it out in the cold to die, I think that we can pretty much agree that that equates, you know, a form of aggression. Now, you say, well, that's immoral. Well, that's their culture. If he didn't do that, then the next child might be a girl. You know, he could end up with 2 or 3 girls. And if you're living in the tundra of the north, those are mouths to feed. And then you eventually get to the point where there's not enough food and everybody dies. So now all of a sudden, this sense of you want the first child to be male so he can grow up and help you with the work, help you on the hunt, that their society would probably, you know, fall. Obviously, since this trait, you know, evolved and survived with these people for so long, it had efficacy. So it might even be arguable within that culture to say that it is immoral not to put the firstborn daughter or the firstborn child, if it's a female, on the ice floe. So if you want to apply an ethical argument, you know, you could possibly say, well, if he's doing that to preserve his life, then that says that life has a certain amount of sanctity. Therefore, it's unethical for him to kill, you know, to put the child. So there's a difference in reasoning between what is moral and what is ethical. And of course, he uses the term morality because, I mean, this guy's really slick. I mean, I hate to say this. There's a lot I admire about him. Because, you know, and I don't think that his expert use of language is a mistake. I mean, it's possible that he's just one of these people who's just fallen into knowing the right things to say. There are people like that. But from what I know about him, he seems to me to be someone who's probably at some point studied these kinds of things. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But this idea of what morality is versus ethics, for him to say that non-aggression is a universally moral idea, not at all. I mean, goodness, he's just flat wrong on that. Is it universally ethically? Well, I don't know. That would be probably a better argument. But morally, not at all. I mean, no. I think I've shown that with the examples I've presented. It's not universal, and it's not necessarily a moral position to be non-aggressive, depending on what your morals are based on. Okay, now let's go to the other leg of his two-legged table, or his, I don't know what analogy we could use, his two-wheeled bicycle or whatever. But his two principles that his entire beliefs are based on is property rights. Now, I've heard from almost everyone who's conservative, anarchist, whatever, lots of different property rights arguments. And once again, I'm not saying, and as much for the non-aggression, I mean, there are arguments either way. My point is it's not universal. And my point again with this, there are arguments for or against property rights. It's not universal. So, the first thing that comes to mind to me are tribal people. And I've heard him argue on other points. Well, tribal people, they have a hierarchy and blah, blah, blah. And, well, yes, they do, but a hierarchy is not necessarily always authoritarian. It can be. Sometimes it's just based on skills or other things. But most, I'm not saying most, as a matter of fact, I retract that. Some tribal people are just totally uninterested in owning things. It's just not part of their psychological makeup. I mean, if you understand how people think, language and thought are very much related. I think it was the Hopi Indians, don't quote me on that, who spoke consistently in the present tense. If I understand right, they didn't have past and future tense of verbs, which would affect the way they think. And so there's a lot of these people, their language is such that the idea of owning things is just not part of their psychological makeup. Some of it is by necessity. If you're in a rainforest, you can't keep a book because it'll get moldy. Metal corrodes. There's not a lot of metal to be had. If a foreigner comes into a group of some of these tribal people, they might marvel at the little silver button that has a picture on it or something. But I think the desire for something like that is probably more based in its novelty. And I don't think that the person who wants the little button that the person from the outside world came in with wants it because they want to hoard buttons or they want to own property. It's just a fascination for them. So a lot of these people, and people who are living the most simplest lives, just basically aren't interested in property rights. So that's one example of how it's not universal, is with tribal people. Another example is Buddhist monks. I wish I could find this article again. I don't know if it was in ancient Thailand or some other country, but they basically had an economic collapse. Here's a sense of anarchy for you. 90% of the population became Buddhist monks and renounced ownership of anything. Now imagine in this country, and like I say, I think it's Thailand, I'm not sure, but this wasn't just a fad that lasted a decade or so. This went on for like 90, 100 years. So we're talking, a couple generations of people who just, an entire country, just not interested in owning things. The only 10% of them were. And it wasn't because, the 10% were an authoritarian, dominant, governing body. It was just because the economy and the government had collapsed. So here you have, I think, an example of something that was very much a type of anarchy, but property rights didn't really play into it. And as I understand it, and I am by no means an expert on Buddhism. but I think that I understand spiritualism enough to get that when someone becomes a Buddhist and they renounce worldly goods, they renounce possessions, it isn't just that they want to live a non-materialistic life. They want to eliminate the idea of possessions. They want to remove themselves from the idea that objects, not just that they have a need for objects, but anything in the world can be owned. That things in the world just are. That it's just part of the makeup of the psychology, of the consciousness they're trying to attain, that they're just about being. So property rights would mean nothing to these people, at least as they're trying to attain that, attain nirvana or attain whatever level of spiritual perfection that they're seeking. So, once again, here, a couple examples of this idea of property rights that are supposed to be universal. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't such a thing as property rights. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that Stevie Boy says it's a universal principle, it's a universal idea, and it's not. There are people who have rejected it. There are people who don't even, who live their lives who aren't even aware of it, who just don't grasp the concept, depending on your location. Now, there's also the inverse of this idea of property rights. That means that if there's an environment and we live off of that environment, which I don't usually like to use terms like universal, but I don't think very many people live in a bubble or in a vacuum. Most of us have to sustain ourselves from an environment, and we share that environment. A lot of people think then ownership is of all. You don't have a right. You don't have a property right. We all have property rights. So, in that respect, the idea of an individual property right is superseded by what is best for all. And so, once again, lots of people believe this, and they've rejected the individualist property right for a context that we all own everything. And this is just as valid an idea as any other. If you are just thinking objectively, if you're just thinking unbiasedly. So if you want to say that property rights is a universal idea, then you really haven't spent enough time looking around the world. But you see, I don't think that Stevie Boy is about truth. If he was, he would not be so biased. He, like I say, he's promoting a political idea, and he's promoting himself. Let's go to another thing that I thought was really, really, it just blew my mind as far as how, I've got friends who are really smart that think this guy they don't see how this guy is a huckster. But this is something he says. He says, government is defined as, and he says, this just isn't something I'm making up. He said that. This is just not something I'm making up. And then he goes on to say, and Barack Obama defines it this way. So now he's saying that Barack Obama says this, and he's not making it up. And the quote is, that government is defined as a group of individuals with a monopoly on the right and the obligation to initiate the use of force in a geographical area. I looked all over the internet for an instance of Barack Obama saying that. Stevie is lying to you. Stevie Boy, it just pulled that out of his ass. Now, it's interesting because the language, and I eluded, I try not to evade, I eluded earlier to the point that language and thoughts are very connected. So what did come up was a lot of anarchist and Ayn Rand information and people debating such. I didn't see Barack Obama coming up with that quote anywhere. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe I didn't dig hard enough. So if you can show me where Barack Obama said that, then I will apologize for being wrong. But at this point, I have to call Stevie a liar. Stevie Boy just lied, And then he goes on to redefine, to clarify, to pass taxes. Taxes are initiation of force. Well, once again, he's redefining the language. And this goes into, and just real quick, Webster's defines government as the act or process of governing, specifically authoritative direction or control. So there's no use of the word monopoly. The language is entirely different. You can argue, but it's pretty obvious to me that this guy has just twisted things to suit his philosophy. He's saying ideas are universal that clearly aren't. And is he a cult? Is him and his ilk and his group, are they a cult? Well, according to what amount of research I've done on this, I would say not yet. But he uses a lot of the very same tactics with, telling people they owe nothing to their families and convincing people that argument and a lot of those kinds of things. And just for the record, because I've read and looked into some stories on this, if you're in an abusive situation, if your parents beat you or your spouse or what have you, yes, I believe you totally have a right to remove yourself from that environment. But I don't think that he doesn't put that condition. And if you think that, you're just going to, leave home because you and your parents have a different political philosophy, therefore you need to distance themselves, and after them raising you for 18 years, you don't owe your mom a phone call on Mother's Day or something like that, then that's just a cultish, that's a very cultish thing. The loyalty that he tries to inspire is very cultish, but I'm not sure he's crossed the line. All I know is if I went to one of his rallies, I sure as hell would not drink the Kool-Aid. And he does kind of look like that Heaven's Gate guy a little bit too, doesn't he? But anyways, so especially don't drink the Kool-Aid if a comet is passing by. So this guy, he's a huckster. I'm very, very concerned that so many people that I think are very intelligent in certain areas of their lives get taken in by this guy, because it's something that a guy who I particularly like a lot is Terence McKenna, and his big thing is don't take my word for it, go find out for yourself. It's why I like him. A couple of the things that he says is that truth can withstand being analyzed. So if, the idea that someone's got to separate you, from other influences is ridiculous. And the idea that there is this lack of rational ability, and that there's a certain level of relativism that people will fall into and not feel the need to do the intellectual heavy lifting that's required, and look at things from a number of different points of view. So, in closing, I want to say, I do think this guy has a lot of cultish elements to what he does. Don't send him your money. Send me your money. I need it more, number one. And I won't tell you what to think. I might tell you how you can think, but I'm not going to tell you what to think. So by all means, if you have any questions, by all, I'm sure his followers are going to put all types of terrible things and tell me how I don't know what I'm talking about. And well, this guy has misrepresented so many ideas that I know. Once again, this is not a debate forum. I don't feel the need. I think I've defined anything that I've said well enough. If you have any questions or something that's left unclear, by all means, ask. But I just wanted to put this out there and just let people know that this Stevie guy, I'm not worried, because I think that he attracts a crazy ilk, and I think that that'll be his undoing in the end. So also, like I say, you can check out my website if you're interested in tarot read or anything like that, or you can just want to donate. All those of you who are following something I'm starting called Shade to Sun, yes, that third episode is coming. Like I say, it's going to be a big one. It's going to be a long one, and it's going to be something that I want to make sure I have all my ducks in a row, because there's a part of it or two that's a little hairy. So, thank you all. Peace.